So, hello, my friends. I'd like to talk to you about fundamentals tonight. And let me start by telling you that I like steam locomotives. When I grew up, there were still steam locomotives running around, carrying, particularly the only place they were left was that they were pulling big trains over the Rocky Mountains, over from Casper, or not Casper, but Cheyenne, Wyoming, on the Union Pacific across the mountain over to California. And my first time that I saw a big steam locomotive was, in fact, when we were riding the train out to California. And I was really impressed with that. And the engineer in me has continued to be interested in these things, and so we run out. We go all over the place looking at riding steam trains and such. And I have spent a good bit of time trying to understand the mechanics of a steam locomotive and how it works and so on. And over here, just to the right of me, I have a model of the largest steam locomotive that was ever built, the Union Pacific Big Boy. This model that I have is a working model, and it has, you can put alcohol in it and some water, and you can fire the thing up and it runs. I've never done it, but it'll pull a quite large kind of scale train this high, this wide, around a track. So I really do like these things, and I'm intrigued with the engineer in me. Finds them very intriguing and interesting because of the sophistication, the relative sophistication of the engineering and the mechanical work that went into these giant, heavy machines. This big boy that I have a model of here weighs 1.3 million pounds. They're giant, and the driving wheels are 7 feet tall, taller than a man. And but if you get to where you look at them and it is very, to me at least, it is very impressive how sophisticated they had gotten in being able to design and utilize and understand steam power and translate that into the capability to, produce trains that ran 100 miles an hour with steam locomotives on the front end of them. And so on one hand, I'm really quite interested in some of those kinds of things, but at the same time, when you look at those giant machines from another era, it's very obvious that there was no way that you could directly go from the steam theory, from the science of steam, to a diesel engine. There are diesel electric engine, which is the locomotives that followed, which were far more efficient and so on. And it's exactly what that's primarily, almost exclusively, what is used today in the railroads all over the world. And so there was a time when steam was at its apex, that everybody kind of thought that was it. That was as good as it got. It was the epitome. Everybody then, early people that were running steam locomotives, could remember when there was only horses and carriages around. And so the steam locomotive and train would be an extraordinary advance, where you could go many times faster than a horse or a horse and buggy. And so it would be easy. It would be easy in that kind of a context to really think that you had it all wired. You could never get any better than this. As a matter of fact, there's a interesting quotes from some of the people at those in those times who thought that there was never going to be anything better than a steam locomotive because they could go so fast. I had a little project for the Chicago Tribune when I lived in Chicago where they asked me to review a book that had been written in 1898 or something like that, that was published by the Tribune, going around to everybody that was anybody that lived at that time, asking them what they thought, 1920 was going to look like 20 years into the future, or I can't remember, maybe it was 1950, but in any case, it was sometime. And the quotes from those folks are really illuminating, and very narrow. Of course, it was just everybody, but I remember specifically one of the quotes was, it's going to be really pretty cool because we're going to get locomotives that go 45 miles an hour, and by 1950, when of course they were running, like I just said, at 100 miles an hour. So it's very easy to get captured by the moment that you're in. The steam locomotives and so on were all the product of Newtonian physics, and thermodynamics, Bernoulli's principles, some of those kinds of things that have been around forever, and some of the original things. And so that was the state of science at that time. Things like quantum theory and Einstein and some of the things that he was talking about were abstract, esoteric notions that had never even started to work their way into everyday life. And yet all of the rest of the world was all fixated on these steam locomotives and these trains and things. And what I can tell you is that the technology and the science at that time, you can't go from there to here in any kind of a evolutionary kind of step. It just doesn't work. There has to be this big jump that goes into a new space. Quantum physics and so on get you lasers and the other kinds of things that allow you to put satellites into the air and so on. And so what you have is, at the time, you have a model that generally works to get you around and allow you to build things like steam locomotives. But you can't get outside of the model, because if you really kind of work your way into some more sophisticated and higher level kind of things, you got to get out and build a new model, because it just doesn't work the same way. Which is not to say that if you're going to build a swing set out in the back of your yard, that certainly Newtonian physics are going to work for that. And they work for all kinds of things, like how you build a house and so on. Or even a large building. Skyscrapers are primarily based upon Newtonian physics. But if you're really going to get out into the fringy edges of where humanity is kind of evolving, you've got to get outside and build a new model. You've got to see the world in really fundamentally different terms. And what's an interesting component of that process that has kind of dominated a lot of what I've done for decades now is the realizing that the models that religion and government and science and whatever it might be, families for that matter, in the past are not the models that we have now, Lord knows. In some cases, everything is moving, and it's moving in a kind of new direction. And so you'd make a kind of a fundamental mistake to kind of lock yourself up into the Newtonian physics space or the steam locomotive space or whatever it turns out to be, and think that that was as good as it got because, that's only the model that's appropriate for that time. And then time moves on, the sweep of evolution continues, and growing and broadening awareness, and you see the world and you see yourself in quite different and bigger ways that kind of things like Newtonian physics are way down kind of the list if you're trying to design an internet or any of the other kinds of things that are very common today. So for a long time, I have really been interested in what the kind of underlying principles of this reality are. Because if you can get yourself down to the underlying principles of the reality, then you have a pretty good possibility of being able to, by extrapolation, to kind of work yourself into the present and start to make a sense in a new and different way, because you have comfort and confidence in that you've got the platform that really works. Now that's important because, like I say, everybody at the time when things are in their ascendancy think that that's the way it all works, and whether it's Galileo or flat earth people or whatever it turns out to be, they all, the Inquisition, all those guys, they thought they were doing the right thing and protecting the reality, as it was in sophisticated kind of terms. And there's a problem with that, of course, and that is that all of this stuff is constantly moving, and if you don't get out in front of it, and if you don't stay with it, and if you don't reach outside of the box, then you're never going to be able to fully make sense. Now, this is really quite important because there are, for instance, in my discipline of electrical engineering, there are some really fundamental kind of equations way back. One guy named Heaviside came up with some of the structural understanding way back in the 80s or 60s or something like that, and all of electrical engineering since then has all been built on top of those presumptions and those equations. And what you're finding out now is that he probably made a mistake, and that all of our understanding of electricity is flawed, because there was an original kind of mistake in the understanding, and nobody else goes back to check it out. And it's the same thing with any number of other things in other areas of science. I mean, it's you start with Newtonian physics and you go to Einsteinian kind of things, and everybody thinks that the quantum theory and so on is the way to go. And you've got all these new agey folks that are running around trying to explain to you how quantum theory is applied to, personal development and all that kind of stuff. And I'm here to tell you that there's a whole bunch of guys that call the electric universe people who will absolutely convince you that Einstein was wrong, which, by the way, is what Nikola Tesla said. Einstein's crazy. He doesn't understand what this is. And so there's another model that's coming. That's and so you got to have this flexibility to kind of move into the new models, and all of the time trying to look for the platform, the architecture that supports it all, and make sure that it it has some substance, and you've taken the time to go back and try to understand that, because it will then illuminate, it will then make sense, help you make sense out of all kinds of things in the present, if you really understand in fundamental and truthful kind of terms what's in the past. And so I have, like I say, spent a lot of time trying to look into, how this reality works. And I've looked at a number of these big toes, TOE, theory of everything, and you've got, an easy dozen of them, I think, that over my lifetime, that I run into, of people who thought they had this fully integrated idea about how all of this reality works. And from my point of view, they've all been wrong. I mean, not that I know necessarily how it all works, although I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of that right now. But but certainly it wasn't. These are not ideas that I came up with, and that suddenly was, explosions of epiphanies in my life. Not at all. But it just doesn't, a lot of these things have just, as I've looked at them, and from my point of view, they don't make sense. They're flawed. They have, they're too narrow. They're not as big. They have assumed, and some things, like most of them, have no provision for God or anything. I mean, like if you do quantum theory and you apply that to cosmology and astronomy, what you've started is with the Big Bang, right? It says from nothing came something, and nobody goes back behind the Big Bang and says, wait a second, what was there? How did they get started? And that's the problem, is that the theories they show up that they're inadequate to the reality that you can see, and if you're willing to get out of that. So I've spent a whole lot of time looking at these kinds of things, and one of the most fundamental and enlightening books that I've ever read, where it was, and I think I forgot 3 or 4 versions of this, it was called the Kybalion, and what it is it is a book about the fundamentals of, they call it Hermetic philosophy. This is from Hermes Trismegistus, who was presumably lived for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years back in the Greek and other Egyptian period. And the Kybalion is written by what they call the 3 initiates. So you don't know who they are, and but it was written sometime back around 1885 or something like that, and so it's been published many times since then. And the Kybalion says, in the most fundamental terms, here's how reality works. There are 7 different principles. And the principles are, the number one is mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. Now that's pretty fundamental. You can't get much lower and deeper than that. That says that everything that there is mental. Essentially, there's nothing physical, it's all mental. The second one, which everybody's heard of, is the law of correspondence, which says as above, so below, as below, so above. This reality is in the patterns that are just embedded, nested fractals that go above and below. So the way large galaxies work is similar, exactly similar structurally as, for instance, the cells in your body work, and goes down to the atomic level. There's the vibration, the 3 law of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. that's really quite interesting, because if you look around and you think about it at all, what you know is that that's true, that everything, whether it's the trees or the animals or how you sleep or what you do, everything, there's always this constant movement. And that's very interesting, as we'll see, as we try to think about who the creator was and how that all works relative to this. But, in this reality, it all looks like nothing rests, everything vibrates. Then there's the law of polarity. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pairs of opposites. And companion one is the law of rhythm, that says everything flows out and in, and everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. I mean, this is the essence of relationships, right? Everybody knows that if you live with anybody for very long, that goes, oh. The whole objective in terms of the whole thing is to constrain the swings and get this thing down to where you work this, and so that what not to say and what to do, and all those kinds of things, so that you constrain the swings. This, by the way, is the basis of Martin Armstrong's whole computer program that has never been wrong in 40 years. It's all based upon rhythm and trying to identify the periodicity, the period of each one of the swings, whether the oscillation is large or small or whatever it is, and then aggregate them, put them all together into a composite. So anyway, there's a law of cause and effect for nothing happens without a cause, that there's nothing that just shows up. There's always a prerequisite initiating kind of cause that pushes it. And then the seventh one is gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine aspects to it. Gender manifests on all planes. And so I have found that really very interesting and very informative and very helpful in being able to kind of understand, not only in my personal life how things work, but to be able to look out around in terms of geopolitics or climate or whatever it turns out to be, and be able to kind of work yourself down to the fundamentals, to the basics of all of this. And by the way, when you get to the first one that says all is mental, then it suddenly disconnects you from all of the physicality in this 3D world that we've got, and then it makes you start to ask questions about what in the world, wait a second, how do you get from all this mental to all of this periodicity and this vibration and all this other kind of stuff? Well, years ago, I first heard of Walter Russell. And Walter Russell was this polymath guy back in the early part of the 20th century, in the 1900s. And Walter Russell was an amazing guy. And most people don't, a lot of people that never heard of him can't remember him, but let me read you about him. He was born 1871 and died 1963. He was an artist, a sculptor, a musician, an architectural designer, a philosopher, a scientist, and an author, known in his lifetime as the man who tapped the secrets of the universe and the man of the century. This guy was the one that hobnobbed around with, Edison and Tesla and all of those kinds of guys, but for most people don't remember him or know him at all. The reason why he said, why we're talking about him tonight is because in 1921, Russell experienced a 39-day illumination period, during which he wrote the notes that later became the knowledge and information base for his classic books. And there's a series of books that he wrote. 39 days. How did he eat? How did he go to the bathroom? I mean, how does that work? But in any case, I mean, this was an extended period. I've got friends like Todd Ovakaitis, who's going to be our speaker a little later this year here at Transition Talks. And, you know, he had a 5-hour one of those things where one day he found himself in the middle of a DNA helix that was as big as the room, and the voice of God or whoever it was began to explain to him how it all worked, and suggested to him that he was going to cure AIDS because he was going to learn how all this worked, which in fact he did in Africa. And so Walter Russell got 39 days or something. It was crazy. But what he came out with was this amazing kind of understanding or explanation of how reality really works. And I want to kind of walk you through this a little bit, because this is really applicable to this whole transition that we're in the middle of. And it gives us some significant insight into where we're going. So here's what, and this is all derivative of this 39. You know, he repackaged these 39-day experience into a whole bunch of different kind of books that all looked at different aspects of this. And so here's what The Secret of Light by Walter Russell has to say about. Here we go. Secret of Light has to say, and this is a book I'm reading right now. By the way, the name of his organization was the Institute for the University of Science and Philosophy, and it's down in Waynesboro, Virginia, on the way down the road a bit from Charlottesville, down in the center of the state. And I've been down there a couple of times before, and it's in fact, I spoke at their event one year a while ago. But here's what Walter Russell says. Now, I want you to think about this in the context of the process and the times that we're living in and where we're going. He says, man is still new. Now, this is God speaking, right? Man is still new. He is barely out of the dark of his jungle. For the million or more years of his unfolding, he has relied upon sensation for his actions and the evidence of his senses for his knowing. Now, this is really important, because what he's going to say is he wasn't thinking in those times. He was just emoting and acting and responding to the way he felt. He has been aware of the spirit in him only for a very few thousands of years. He has not yet learned that bodies are but self-created mechanisms which manifest their centering self, and that self manifests God as one within it. That's a little convoluted, but let me explain that to you. He's not what he's just starting to open up and try to explain. This is only page 2 of this book. Is that all of the 3D reality that we experience and that we talk about and spend all this time talking about is all comes out of just the mind of God, of which we are a part of, and that there is no manifest, tangible reality that we respond to and presume to be real and build our whole lives around. Now, that is a really kind of interesting kind of notion, because if you ever start to kind of internalize that, what you start to do is you look at this reality in a different kind of way. Because you remember last time I told you there's nothing matters, but everything is important. You start to say, none of this really matters, but you got to act like it's important. Why doesn't it matter? Because it is all the byproduct of thought, of idea. He calls it idea, singular. I'd say ideas, but anyway, and that there is something going on here that is much more fundamental and structural than what we all believe. It's almost like we're in this steam locomotive time where we think that they're so elegant and so cool, and they go 45 miles an hour, and we don't know that there is another reality. It'll take you thousands of miles an hour in the air and other kinds of things, but it's bigger and it's outside, and it's 2 generations of understanding removed from where you are. And so what it's saying is that, this all comes from your mind. Likewise, he has not yet learned that bodies neither live nor die, but repeat themselves continuously and forever, as all idea of mind likewise repeats itself. Wow. It never lives and never dies. I mean, we're all fixated on this living and dying kind of thing. I mean, I understand that a lot of you thought about some of this stuff before and have been exposed to it, but if you kind of see it in a sequence of like this, it's very useful to try to restructure the framework. And you haven't learned that you don't live or die, and that you just repeat yourself continuously. And it's very much like the Hermetic principles, right? That say that everything always moving, and it's always going back and forth and so on. And I'm not going to talk about it tonight, but as you work your way into this book, it starts to explain in detail exactly how that happens. And if you're at all interested in these kind of structural kind of things, you really should get this and read it. It's not really hard to read, but it is not simple. You got to sit there and work it. I mean, by definition, you're getting yourself outside of the box, and so you're working yourself into space that doesn't operate with the same kind of parameters and the same structures and the same principles as everything that we've learned. You're trying to get outside of that, and so it's kind of mind bending in a very interesting kind of way. I read for 1 or 2 hours in the middle of the night almost every night. And so I sit there reading this thing going, read the sentence, and I go back and read the sentence, and then go read the sentence again to try to get that idea and get this thing locked in. And so I want to just go through here and read a couple of these things so that you get a sense of all of this. Man cannot, first of all, what it says is that God is light, that everything, the practical, if you will, the tangible aspect of the mentalism, the thought, the mind space that generates all of this is light. And so the most fundamental level of what all of our reality kind of arises from is light. And it says, man cannot bear much of the light at this time, while his body is still new and too near to its jungle. All who are well out of the jungle have already found enough light to illumine their way out of the dark depths. Now, this is interesting because what he says is that there's a self kind of facilitating way in which you always get enough light out in front of you to be able to see out of the next step and how to get out of the jungle, is what he's really saying, and what it supports other ways in here. And so there's a whole lot about desire and what do you want to do, and what desire then does is, it's the secret and all these kinds of things about manifestation. But when your mind and your thinking generate this framework for desire, which then starts to translate the light into the more tangible things that we seem to, the seemingly tangible things that are around us. He says, ever so slight a glimpse, one cannot for one moment remove his seeking eyes from the high heavens. Okay, so this starts to get practical in terms of what we're talking about this period of time. Because what I'm interested in this for is just how you translate it, or how does it transpose into things that we can use for getting from here to the next, level of attainment or alignment or whatever, consciousness into a new human in a new world. And what these guys, this is saying is that the key to this is that you start to think in terms of this large transcendent light source that is the creator, and make this almost an integral part of how you live every day, and that you are increasingly plugged into this larger kind of perspective that's providing illumination and light onto your path as you go forward. And this is really important because ever so slight a glimpse below into the dark things, bring him back to the fears of the dark, which tempt him to plunge back into them. This is in part what I experienced down in Mexico, because I was not familiar with any of this stuff that happened down there, and it was really exposed me to a bunch of things. And I literally told you that it got too dark for me and I needed to go out into this the space. And I was looking for, it was really helpful to find this in this book, because I naturally kind of said, I really don't want to feel like that. But what this book is saying, and what the source or God is saying, is that the evolutionary process is a function of how you think, and the way you think is a product of what you're concentrating on and what you're oriented toward. And so if you get out into this higher, lighter space where where's this increasing and expanded kind of sense of reality, is that then will carry you out into this next level of elevation and development. So therefore, forever look therefore forever upward into the high heavens of inspiration, where glory awaits the fearless. All-knowing seekers of glory awaits the fearless, all-knowing seekers of beauty in the purity of the universal light. To him whose eyes are in the high heavens, the light will forever come and will forever be transformed as he finds it. I'm not going to, I could spend some more time and read some of these things, but I want to just go back to one kind of end this little section by reading you the first thing that's in the first part of this book, and it's from this book that Walter Russell wrote called The Divine Iliad. He had these 39 days of epiphany, and he came back and he wrote this book, The Divine Iliad, which condensed all of what he had learned in here. And here's kind of quotes the words from God. And I just would encourage you to really listen to this, because if you ever kind of start to, again, to internalize this, what it will do is change the bias. It'll change the level on kind of importance or credibility that you have about everything that's going on around us. It will take you into a different kind of space. Number one, I am the light. I alone am. That's what this creator is saying. I am. I the alone am. What I am, thou art, which is to say, you are God. You are not derived from God. You are not on the outside looking, praying to God. You are God. Thou art the light. Thou art one with me. That's an extraordinarily powerful kind of notion that drives you into this space that says, it's all, we've all heard this, that it's all inside of us and we can all do this, but it's easy to kind of mouth those terms and hear people talk about them, but they kind of actually actualizing those ideas or something else. Man may know me by desiring to know me. And that, by extension, kind of works to anything. If you want to know who this creator is, you desire to know who the creator is. And that is the process that then activates that begins the mechanism that brings the information to you. Well, it's, a different way of saying what the secret and all these kinds of other kind of people try to say the same thing. It's all about desire. And when you put your desire into play around whatever it is, whether it is trying to understand and know what this larger reality is, or whether it is about some aspect of this 3D world, that is how this all works. To know me is to be me. That is to say that the more that you embrace and make into an integral part of this larger kind of reality is this knowing, you get a knowing understanding about what it is, and you then get, if you will, get closer to and integrated with. To know me is to be me. Through my light alone can man know me. So you only know through light. I don't know exactly what that means, but it doesn't mean darkness. I can tell you that. And so man is light when he knoweth that he is light. So this is a kind of a self-fulfilling kind of notion that says is when you get to the place where you know you're light, you are light. And then before you know until you know that you are light, you are not illuminated, apparently. And so there's again, this desire and this focusing that makes this all thing happen. Man is me when he knoweth that he is me. Same idea. It says is that you will become this marriage with this larger kind of notion of the creator. When you know that you're doing that, when you know that you are part of that, and that only comes from this constant reinforcement of these basic ideas. There's a guy in Uganda, a black guy in Uganda, who decided that he was really going to try to see if he could execute the principles that have been published other places in terms of how you do manifestation. And so for a year and a half, all day long, he did other things too. In the back of his mind, he's always running. He says, I am God. I am God, I am God, I am God. And all of a sudden, at one point in a year and a half, suddenly, boom, it changed. And suddenly he had this knowing, and now he can manifest. He's got a little business over there, and he does stuff all over the world on the internet, and he can help people and show them how to manifest things. And why is it? Because there was a mind shift that happened. There was a transition that happened to where he got to the place because of just this reinforcement and so on. Yeah, I don't think you need a year and a half of doing that. But that's one way. Uh, and you can get yourself into this space where you see everything in a different way, and then it opens up amazing kinds of capabilities. All men will come to me in due time, but theirs is the agony of awaiting. And we all know about that. That says that, in time, everybody's going to work their way back to the source. But it's tougher for some folks, and some of them aren't ready, and so on. Well, and I've left out a whole lot of this that you can look up if you're so interested in The Secret of Light by Walter Russell. But if it resonates with you, if you read it and you say, yeah, that kind of makes sense, there's good logic to that thing. And somewhere kind of deep inside you get this harmonious response to these concepts and these ideas. I'm convinced it'll change your life, and it'll certainly be a very effective mechanism for transiting and navigating the way through this amazing kind of transition to literally becoming a new human that'll allow us all to become the progenitors of this new world that is certainly going to come.